All right, welcome to another deep dive where we take those books and articles that you're curious about and break them down,
Yeah,
and we try to extract, just the most essential information.
the good stuff.
Yeah, the good stuff.
The need to know.
Need to know info, and today we're going deep into Relax into Stretching by Pavel Tsatsouline.
Ooh, yeah, classic.
Yeah, so this book was published way back in 2001 by Dragon Door Publications.
Okay.
And just a quick standard disclaimer,
Yeah.
Always check with your doctor before
Of course.
starting any new workout program.
Yeah.
And just so you know, the publisher is not responsible for any injuries.
Right, right.
But what's so interesting about this book, and one of the reviewers pointed this out, is that Pavel really kind of flips the script on how we think about flexibility.
Yeah.
Kind of like how he did with his strength training methods in Power to the People.
Right, yeah, he's known for sort of shaking things up, taking conventional wisdom and kind of turning it on its head.
Yeah, and seeing what happens.
Exactly.
I mean, one thing I noticed right away, flipping through this book at the beginning, there's like a chorus of praise.
Oh, yeah.
From all these martial artists and fitness enthusiasts. And some of them were already like pretty flexible.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I'm already, I could do the splits, whatever.
Right.
But they were amazed by how well this worked and how fast it worked. Even people with like creaky joints, they're like, wow, this is amazing.
You see words like really interesting, radical, but sensible. The first, last, and only choice.
Wow.
Really strong endorsement. Someone even said well-written, even a little funny.
Okay.
Which, for a fitness book is...
It's a bonus.
It's a bonus, not always a gift.
That's a given, yeah.
And someone even mentioned immediate benefits.
Oh, nice.
Which I think is really appealing to people. Like, I don't want to wait 6 months to see results. I want to feel something now.
Yeah.
So it seems like, we're really about to explore a different way of thinking about
Something that feels pretty fundamental to like moving our bodies.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of our mission on this deep dive, just for you, is to try to unpack Pavel's core ideas about flexibility and his techniques for actually achieving greater flexibility.
Yeah.
And we're going to zero in on this kind of surprising role of the nervous system and how creating muscle tension can actually be the key to becoming more flexible.
Interesting.
Okay, so according to Pavel, what is the big problem with how we've traditionally approached stretching? Like, what's the fundamental flaw there?
Yeah, so the core argument in Relax into Stretching, and that this is really like a paradigm shift when you think about how ingrained this idea is.
Yeah.
That we need to stretch to lengthen our muscles, how ingrained that is in our culture and fitness and everything.
Yeah.
Tsatsouline is saying, hold on a second. The feeling of tightness you have isn't primarily because your muscles or your connective tissues are actually physically short.
What? Instead, he's saying it's largely due to your nervous system. He even calls it your muscle software.
Okay.
And something called the stretch reflex, which I'm sure we're all familiar with to some degree.
Right. So is that the thing that, like, when you go to the doctor and they hit your knee with a hammer?
Yeah, exactly.
And your leg shoots up?
That's the stretch reflex.
Okay, but how does that tie into our flexibility on a day-to-day basis?
So that's a really simplified example of it. But basically, the stretch reflex is a protective mechanism, right? It's your body's way of trying to prevent injury.
Got it.
And so when a muscle is stretched suddenly or beyond a certain point, the stretch reflex kicks in and causes that muscle to contract to protect itself. And what Tsatsouline is saying is that a lot of times our bodies perceive a stretch as a potential threat, even if it's not. And so that stretch reflex is acting like a brake, limiting how far we can actually move.
Okay.
He uses this really brilliant analogy. He says, think of a telescopic antenna. He says traditional stretching is kind of like trying to mangle the outer tube, trying to force it to be longer.
Right.
But his methods are more about pulling the inner tubes out, so working with the nervous system.
I see.
To allow the muscles to actually extend to their full natural length.
So it's almost like our own bodies are putting the brakes on our flexibility.
Yes.
And he's giving us these tools to kind of gently release those brakes.
Yeah, it's about convincing your body that it's safe to go further.
I like that.
Instead of forcing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first technique he talks about is waiting out the tension.
Yeah.
What is the essence of that technique?
So this one is a much more passive approach, almost meditative in a way. You're going to ease into a comfortable stretch, just to the point where you feel a gentle pull, and then you just stay there.
Okay.
You wait patiently for your muscles to relax, and this is where Tsatsouline really emphasizes tuning into your body. He says the time it takes for that relaxation to occur can vary a lot. Yeah.
depending on, your fitness level, your stress level, even which muscle you're working on.
Okay.
He even specifically says that trying to time yourself is a decidedly bad idea because it's taking you out of that feeling process, being present in your body.
Oh,
So it's not about looking at the clock, it's about feeling.
So just hold the stretch. How long are we talking roughly?
He suggests it usually takes around a couple of minutes.
Okay.
But again, it's not about the clock.
Got it.
Once you feel that letting go, that softening of the tension,
Okay.
then you very gently increase the stretch just a little bit further.
Okay.
Your muscles will probably tighten up again, and then you repeat that cycle.
Right.
Easing in, waiting, breathing slow, deep breaths until you feel another layer of relaxation. And again, he's very clear that this isn't about pulling or bouncing or forcing.
Right.
It's about patiently waiting for that to happen naturally and then just taking up the slack.
Yeah, gently.
Gently, yeah. He does give some warnings about when not to use this technique, right?
Yeah, there are some crucial caveats.
Okay.
Tsatsouline says waiting out the tension is most effective for comfortable lower body stretches.
Got it.
Things like a leg straddle, where you can hold the position, be relaxed.
Yeah.
He specifically says it's not appropriate for things like the good morning or any spinal forward flexion, like trying to touch your toes.
So no backgrounding.
No backgrounding with this.
Okay.
Also, no forcing the stretch, trying to rush the relaxation. And most importantly, don't apply this to your back.
Okay.
That's a definite no-no because of the potential for instability there.
Got it. It sounds like a very mindful approach to stretching.
It is, yeah.
Really paying attention to what your body's telling you.
Yeah, it's about that mind-body connection.
And, it reminds me of something Victor Popenko talks about in his book, Flexibility, Strength, Endurance, which Pavel actually references. What was Popenko's main idea about achieving greater mobility?
Popenko was really big on this idea that the key to mobility is relaxation.
Okay.
That's like his central tenet, and obviously Tsatsouline agrees with that.
Yeah.
He emphasizes cultivating this psychological mindset on relaxation while you're performing these slow, deliberate stretches, which he recommends holding for about a minute.
Got it.
Give or take.
Okay.
And during that time, your focus is on actively reducing the tension in the muscles you're stretching.
Right.
So really trying to let go.
And he even talks about using mental imagery.
He does, yeah.
To help with this.
He found that using vivid mental pictures can really enhance that relaxation process.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, if you're working on your splits, he talks about visualizing your legs as ends of a rope that are gently drifting further and further apart.
I see.
Or he talks about using heat imagery, so mentally focusing on the area of greatest tension, picturing it being wrapped in a warm towel, and feeling that heat kind of melt away the tightness.
Oh, nice.
And relax the muscle.
Yeah.
And he really emphasizes being persistent with that mental desire to relax.
Okay.
He says that each successful release of tension allows you to then stretch just a little bit more.
Right. So like a gradual process.
It is, yeah, a very gradual, mindful process.
Yeah. So both of those, initial approaches really highlighting the mind-body connection and the active choice to let go of tension.
Exactly.
And then Pavel dives into the role of our emotions, particularly fear and anxiety, and how flexible we are.
This is fascinating, yeah. So Tsatsouline explains that there's this really deep and direct link between our limbic system, which is like our emotional center in the brain, and the neural pathways that control muscle length and tension.
Wow.
He actually mentions scientific studies that have shown that fear, anxiety, even just the anticipation of pain can significantly restrict our range of motion. Yeah, by causing our muscles to tense up defensively.
So if you're feeling stressed, your muscles are naturally going to be tighter.
Exactly. Yeah, and it makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Yeah, of course.
If your body senses danger, it wants to be ready to either fight or flee.
Right.
And tight muscles can help with that.
Got it.
But in our modern world, that's not always helpful.
Right.
And Tsatsouline really stresses the importance of maximizing the perceived safety of your stretches.
Okay.
He even says, if it takes 3 chairs and a spotter to make you feel secure, attempting a split, then that's what you should do.
Right.
Because the logical reasons behind your fear might not be entirely rational.
Okay.
But the effect that fear has on your flexibility is very real.
Yeah.
He also touches on the power of belief.
Okay.
Saying if you don't believe you can achieve a certain level of flexibility, you're unlikely to.
Interesting.
Yeah, so mindset plays a big role.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered these more passive methods focused on relaxation and the mental aspects.
Right.
Now Pavel moves into more proactive techniques, and this is where things get interesting.
Okay, yeah.
He starts with proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF.
PNF?
That's a mouthful.
It is, but he does give us some easier to remember terms.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he calls it contract relax stretching or isometric stretching.
Okay, those are a little bit more descriptive.
Yeah, they actually tell you what you're doing.
Right.
And he credits Dr. Henry Cabot with developing this approach about half a century ago. And the fundamental idea is to fool the stretch reflex.
Fool the stretch reflex. So now we're
playing mind games with our bodies.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, how do we do that? How do we fool this reflex?
So you get into your stretch.
Okay.
And instead of just holding it passively,
Right.
you're going to actively contract the muscle that's being stretched.
So even though it feels like it's already at its limit, you try to tighten it further.
You do, and the science behind this is really elegant.
Okay.
Tsatsouline explains the role of these specialized cells in your spinal cord called Renshaw cells.
Okay.
And basically, when you contract a muscle,
Right.
the Renshaw cell acts to inhibit the stretch reflex in that same muscle. It's like the Renshaw cell saying, hey, this muscle is already working, so there's no need to overreact to the stretch.
So you're basically telling the stretch reflex to calm down.
Yeah, you're giving it a different signal.
Okay.
A signal that says everything is under control.
So you tense the stretched muscle, the stretch reflex calms down.
Right.
And then you can usually stretch a little bit deeper.
Exactly. And the results can be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Tsatsouline mentions research showing that contract relaxed stretching is at least 267% more effective than conventional relaxed stretching.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It's huge, but the benefits go beyond just range of motion.
Okay.
He says this method also develops flexibility with strength, which is a more natural and functional kind of flexibility. Our bodies generally don't allow us to access a range of motion that we don't have the strength to control.
Nice.
He gives the example of a frozen shoulder.
Right.
Someone might have really limited range of motion after an injury.
Okay.
But under anesthesia, that shoulder can often move freely. So what's going on there?
Right.
The nervous system is restricting movement when the muscles aren't strong enough to stabilize and control it.
So you're saying it's not just about how long the muscles are.
It's not. It's about the whole system working together.
It's about strength and control.
Exactly.
Okay, so by strengthening the muscles in that stretched position, you're essentially telling your body, hey, it's safe to be here.
Yeah.
I got this.
You have the strength to recover from that position.
Okay.
So the stretch feels safer, and you can ultimately increase flexibility.
So there's this idea of tight weakness.
Yes.
Where a muscle is tight, but it's also weak.
It can be, yeah.
And that's like a double whammy.
It is. It creates this vicious cycle where weakness contributes to inflexibility.
Yeah.
And inflexibility limits strength development.
So you're saying that strengthening in that extreme range of motion, using these contract relax methods, can actually help to break that cycle.
Exactly. You're sending that signal to your nervous system that you have the strength to handle it.
Okay, and he also mentions isometrics.
He does.
As a practical way to build strength.
Yeah, so isometrics are where you're pushing or pulling against an immovable object.
Right.
So you're creating tension, but there's no movement. And this can be a really effective way to build strength in those stretched positions.
Interesting.
Yeah, so think about like holding a plank. That's an isometric exercise.
Right.
You're not moving, but you're creating a lot of tension.
Okay, so contract relax is the general framework.
Yeah.
Now he dives into some specific variations, starting with contrast breathing. How does that work?
So contrast breathing is a really interesting and accessible variation of contract relax. You start by easing into a comfortable stretch.
Right.
And then you're going to take a maximal inhalation.
Okay.
And simultaneously tighten up your entire body.
Yep.
Really focusing on contracting the muscles that are being stretched.
So you're holding the stretch.
Yeah.
And you're tensing everything up.
Yeah. He says, think of your whole body becoming as tight as a clenched fist. You can even physically make a fist that can help create that full body tension.
Interesting.
You're going to hold that peak tension for just a second or two while still maintaining the stretch.
Right.
And then you suddenly release everything with a big audible sigh of relief.
It's like a sigh of relief.
It feels good.
So I'm picturing like Holding a hamstring stretch.
Yeah.
Breathing in, tensing up, and then
letting go.
letting go.
With a sigh.
Okay, so what's the connection to the breathing here?
So he explains that the deepest relaxation
Okay.
can often only be achieved in contrast to a state of great tension.
Interesting.
He calls it the principle of yin and yang.
Okay.
You need that balance.
Got it.
So the maximal inhalation and the full body tightening create that tension.
Right.
And then the sudden complete release with the sigh
Okay.
helps facilitate a deeper rebound into relaxation,
Interesting.
allowing you to sink further into the stretch.
So it's that contrast.
That's the contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes it
It
work.
kind of resets the nervous system.
Okay.
Yeah.
He does mention being careful not to hyperventilate.
He does. He says, don't overdo it.
Okay.
You might need to compensate
Yeah.
for those big breaths by breathing slightly less frequently overall
Right.
and maybe holding your breath briefly after each exhalation.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Okay. And then there's forced relaxation, which sounds even more intense. Yeah. Intense is definitely the right word for this one.
Okay, what's the idea behind that technique?
So with forced relaxation, you start by holding a comfortable stretch,
Okay, so far so good.
but then you actively contract the stretched muscle with steadily increasing effort until it becomes almost unbearable.
Wow.
So a very high level of tension.
Sorry.
You maintain that intense contraction, breathing shallowly.
He says don't hold your breath completely.
He does, yeah, that's important.
Okay.
Until you feel like you absolutely can't sustain it any longer.
Right.
And then you release that tension
Okay.
with that same sigh of relief.
Yeah.
And immediately try to deepen the stretch.
Yeah.
And he mentions that with enough mental fortitude,
Okay.
you can actually continue contracting until your muscles start to visibly quiver
Okay.
and finally give out from exhaustion.
That sounds intense.
It is. That's the essence of forced relaxation.
Yeah.
And the name definitely fits.
Okay. And then we get to the clasp knife method.
Mm-hmm.
And just the name itself is pretty striking.
It is.
What's going on there?
So Tsatsouline describes this as an even more direct and aggressive way to basically switch off the stretch reflex. And it takes advantage of something called the inverse stretch reflex.
Okay.
So unlike the regular stretch reflex, which causes a muscle to contract when stretched,
Right.
the inverse stretch reflex causes a muscle to relax
Okay.
when it senses it's under extreme tension.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a safeguard to prevent tendon injury.
I see. Okay.
The Golgi tendon organs are the key players here.
Okay.
They're sensory receptors located in your tendons,
Got it.
and they're responsible for this reflex.
So instead of trying to override the stretch reflex, you're actually triggering the opposite response, a relaxation.
Exactly.
Okay, how do you do that?
So you start by getting into a comfortable stretch,
Okay.
and then you forcefully contract the muscles you're stretching
Mm.
with near maximum effort, gradually increasing the intensity of that contraction.
Okay.
You hold that very high level of tension for about 5 to 7 seconds
Right.
until your muscles start to tremble or you feel like they're about to give way.
Okay, this sounds like a very advanced technique.
It is.
Right.
You're going to continue breathing shallowly during this intense contraction.
Right.
Don't hold your breath.
Okay.
And then, just like with the other techniques we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
you release the tension with a sigh of relief
Yeah.
and immediately try to increase the depth of the stretch.
Okay, and again, he emphasizes being careful
He does, he says.
with this technique.
Yeah, exercise, good judgment,
Yeah.
be very attuned to your body's signals
Great.
because this is a powerful technique.
Okay.
It can be very effective.
All right, now Pavel is very clear about something he doesn't want you to do,
Right.
which is to stretch your ligaments.
Yeah, this is a big no-no, according to him.
Why is that? Why is that so potentially harmful?
So ligaments, unlike muscles, are not designed to be stretched significantly,
Okay.
except maybe in very young children. He says that stretching a ligament by even a small percentage,
Okay.
around 6%, can actually cause it to tear. And even if you don't get a full tear, you can get micro tears, scarring, elongation, and a permanent weakening.
So you're saying that stretching a ligament too far can
Yeah.
actually make it weaker and less stable.
Exactly, and that's what he calls a plastic deformity.
Okay. And so what happens if you have a stretched ligament?
Well, it leads to a loose and unstable joint,
Right.
which makes you much more susceptible to acute injuries.
Okay.
And it also significantly increases the long-term risk of osteoarthritis.
Right, because the joint is not properly supported.
Exactly. There's more wear and tear on the cartilage.
Okay. So how can you tell
Right.
if you're stretching a ligament rather than a muscle?
So Tsatsouline says the key indicator is the location of the sensation.
Okay.
If you feel sharp discomfort or pain localized in the joint itself, that's a red flag.
Okay.
He uses the example of hamstring stretches.
Right.
You know, your hamstring muscles connect to your bones via tendons a few inches above your knee.
Okay.
If you feel a distinct pulling sensation in the back of your knee joint during a hamstring stretch, that's a sign that you're likely putting excessive stress on the ligaments and joint capsules.
So that's no good.
No, it's not what you want.
Okay.
You want to feel the stretch in the muscle belly,
Right.
which is located between your glutes and roughly a hand's width above your knee.
Okay.
And his recommendation is to slightly bend your knee during hamstring stretches. This simple adjustment takes the tension off the ligaments at the back of the knee.
Got it.
And helps refocus the stretch onto the hamstring muscle itself.
Okay, so it's all about feeling that sensation in the right place.
It is, and he reiterates that the normal sensation during proper flexibility training is muscle tension.
Okay.
Which can be uncomfortable or even painful.
Yeah.
But sharp, localized joint pain is a warning sign.
Got to back off.
Back off, yeah.
Okay, so what happens if you do experience a muscle strain or a tear during stretching? What's Pavel's advice for dealing with that?
So for minor muscle tears,
Okay.
Tsatsouline's advice is rice it and then stretch it.
Okay.
He doesn't spend a lot of time on the ricey protocol.
Right. Rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Exactly. He figures most people are familiar with that.
Yeah.
But his emphasis is on starting gentle contract relax stretching as soon as it's tolerable. Ideally within the first 24 hours.
So pretty quickly.
Relatively quickly, yeah.
Okay.
And he explains that when a muscle fiber tears, small blood vessels also rupture, which leads to internal bleeding and a muscle spasm. And the spasm can restrict blood flow to the area, hindering the healing process and increasing stiffness.
So the gentle contract relax stretching is actually helping to improve blood flow and reduce that spasm.
It is. It's helping to alleviate that tension and prevent excessive muscle atrophy from inactivity.
Right. So you don't want to just completely immobilize it.
No, you want to keep it moving gently.
Okay.
And it aids in restoring flexibility to the injured area.
So he's suggesting doing these gentle stretches multiple times throughout the day.
Multiple times.
Focusing on contracting and releasing the muscles around the injured spot.
Yeah, even applying gentle pressure with your knuckles or fingertips during the contraction.
Okay.
And he does caution against using more aggressive techniques. Like the clasp knife method during that initial healing phase.
Okay.
And of course, for any suspected serious muscle tear or other injuries, consult a doctor.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to make sure it's nothing serious.
Definitely.
He also mentions how things like age and sex can influence your choices when it comes to stretching.
Yeah, these are important factors to keep in mind.
Okay. What are some of the specific considerations there?
So for young girls,
Okay.
he advises against an overemphasis on extreme flexibility training because it could potentially have negative effects on joint stability and spinal development.
Okay, that makes sense. They're still growing.
They are, yeah.
Okay.
So he recommends a more gradual and balanced approach.
Got it.
And he points out that sometimes a lack of apparent flexibility in young girls might not be due to muscle tightness, but rather due to insufficient strength in the muscles that are responsible for producing that movement.
So, again, it comes back to strength.
It does, yeah.
Okay, what about boys and adolescents?
He doesn't offer specific warnings for them, but he implies the importance of balance development as well, you know? Not just focusing on one thing.
Yeah.
But for pregnant women or those who have recently given birth, he has a significant caution because of the hormone relaxing.
Right, expert speaker.